Roxy Walker had always believed in the importance of creating happy memories for her children. As a single mother of two, life was often a whirlwind of work, school events, and everyday responsibilities, but summer was their sanctuary. Every year when the heat settled over the small suburban neighborhood managed by the notorious Evergreen Homeowner Association, the community pool became a retreat for her family. The pool was more than just a place to swim. It was where her 8-year-old son, Liam, had learned to dog paddle after weeks of determined practice. It was where her 5-year-old daughter, Sophie, delighted in the small, shallow waiting area, splashing and giggling without a care in the world. For Roxy, it was a haven where she could watch her children thrive while catching up with neighbors or simply enjoying a rare moment of peace. This summer, Roxy had invited her niece and nephew to join her family for their Saturday pool outings. Her sister, who worked long hours as a nurse, was grateful for the help, and Roxy was happy to spend time with her niece Mia, 10, and nephew Jordan, 7. Every Saturday morning, Roxy would pack a bag full of towels, sunscreen, snacks, and pool toys, and the 4 children would chatter excitedly as they headed to the pool. The rules established by the Evergreen Homeowner Association clearly stated that each household was allowed up to 4 guests at the pool per visit, provided they signed in at the front desk. Roxy had always followed this rule meticulously. She made sure to register Mia and Jordan every time, and the kids quickly became favorites among the lifeguards for their polite manners and enthusiasm. The other families at the pool seemed to enjoy seeing the children, too. Older residents often smiled as they watched the kids dive for pool toys or race across the water. Roxy herself had formed casual friendships with several other parents who frequented the pool, bonding over shared sunscreen brands and tips for keeping kids hydrated in the summer heat. But as the summer wore on, Roxy began to notice a change in the atmosphere. It started subtly. One Saturday, she caught a disapproving glance from a woman she recognized as Brenda, a longtime member of the Homeowner Association known for her stern demeanor. Brenda was seated on a lounge chair under a large sun hat, her nose buried in a clipboard. Roxy didn't think much of it at the time, assuming Brenda was simply tallying something or overseeing pool maintenance. After all, it was common knowledge that Brenda took her role on the Homeowner Association board very seriously, some might say too seriously. Then, a few weeks later, Roxy overheard a snippet of conversation between Brenda and Greg Daniels, the chairperson of the Homeowner Association. They were standing near the pool entrance, and their voices carried over the sound of splashing water. Brenda mentioned that some residents were feeling pushed out of the pool and suggested that action be taken to address the issue. Greg nodded and muttered something about protecting the community's enjoyment. Roxy felt a pang of unease. Were they talking about her? She brushed off the thought, convincing herself she was being paranoid. After all, she had done nothing wrong. The rules allowed for guest visits, and she was always careful to follow them. But the tension only grew. One Saturday, Roxy arrived at the pool to find Brenda watching her intently as she signed in Mia and Jordan. When Roxy smiled and said hello, Brenda barely acknowledged her, her eyes narrowing as she scribbled something on her clipboard. Roxy tried to shrug it off, but it was hard to shake the feeling that she was being unfairly scrutinized. That evening, when Roxy checked her mailbox, she found an official-looking envelope from the Evergreen Homeowner Association. She opened it and read that her family's access to the pool was being suspended indefinitely due to excessive guest visits that disrupted the enjoyment of other residents. It went on to state that complaints had been received, although no further details were provided. Roxy read the letter multiple times, her disbelief growing with each pass. She hadn't violated any rules, she was certain of it. How could they claim she had exceeded guest allowances when she had always adhered to the stated limit? And what complaints were they referring to? None of her neighbors had ever mentioned any issues to her. Anger and frustration bubbled up inside her. The pool was one of the few joys her family could afford during the summer, and now it was being taken away for reasons she couldn't understand. The next morning, she called the office of the Homeowner Association. The phone rang several times before Greg Daniels picked up. His tone was curt and impersonal as Roxy explained her situation. She emphasized that she had always followed the rules, but Greg responded that the decision was final and had been made based on complaints from other residents. When Roxy pressed for details about these complaints, Greg refused to provide them, citing confidentiality. Feeling stonewalled, Roxy decided to escalate the matter. If the homeowner association thought they could push her around without explanation, they were wrong. This was about more than just pool access, it was about fairness and accountability. Roxy resolved to fight the decision, not just for her family, but for everyone in the community who had ever felt powerless against arbitrary rules. She had no idea just how far this battle would take her. Roxy Walker couldn't shake the feeling of injustice as she sat at her kitchen table, staring at the letter from the Evergreen Homeowner Association. The official tone, the vague accusations, and the sudden suspension of her pool access felt not only unfair, but also deeply personal. Roxy had always considered herself a rule-abiding member of the community. She'd paid her dues, adhered to the guidelines, and never caused trouble. The idea that someone could quietly lodge complaints against her and strip her family of their small summer joy left her both confused and furious. Determined to get answers, Roxy began her day by revisiting the Homeowner Association's rulebook, which she had kept tucked away in a drawer since moving in. The booklet, while detailed, was also frustratingly vague in certain areas. It clearly stated that residents were allowed up to 4 guests per household for pool visits and required all guests to be signed in upon arrival. Nowhere did it mention a cap on the frequency of guest visits or a mechanism for suspending pool access based on complaints alone. The rules seemed straightforward enough, yet somehow they had been twisted against her. With a notebook in hand, Roxy jotted down key points she wanted to bring up during her next interaction with the Homeowner Association. Her list included questions about the supposed complaints, evidence of her alleged violations, and the specific process the board had followed to reach their decision. She was determined not to let this go without a fight, but she also knew she needed to tread carefully. The Homeowner Association had a reputation for being unyielding, and she couldn't risk escalating the situation without a plan. Roxy's first step was to contact Greg Daniels, the chairperson of the Homeowner Association. She dialed his office number again, hoping for a more productive conversation than their initial call. This time her tone was calm but firm. "Mr. Daniels, I'm not asking for special treatment. I just want clarity. If there are complaints against me, I deserve to know what they are and how they were handled." Greg's response was just as dismissive as before. "Ms. Walker, the board has reviewed the matter thoroughly. The decision to suspend your access was based on multiple resident complaints. I'm afraid there's nothing more to discuss." "But I have followed the rules," Roxy insisted. "I've never exceeded the guest limit, and I've signed everyone in every single time. How can you justify this?" "The board has the authority to act in the best interest of the community," Greg replied, his voice growing colder. "And we believe this decision reflects that." Frustrated but unwilling to let the matter rest, Roxy decided to take a different approach. She began reaching out to her neighbors, hoping to gather more information and possibly find support for her case. Over the next few days, she knocked on doors, made phone calls, and stopped to chat with people during her walks through the neighborhood. To her surprise, many residents were sympathetic to her situation. Some had noticed the tension at the pool and had even overheard Brenda and Greg discussing overuse by certain families. Others shared their own frustrations with the Homeowner Association, recounting instances where they felt unfairly targeted or ignored. One neighbor, an older man named Frank, told Roxy about an incident the previous year when the Homeowner Association had fined him for having a garden gnome that they claimed violated aesthetic guidelines. "It's all about power," Frank said with a sigh. "They make up rules as they go along, and they don't like it when anyone pushes back." Encouraged by the support, Roxy decided to document everything. She wrote down the details of her interactions with the Homeowner Association, gathered statements from neighbors who were willing to speak on her behalf, and kept a log of her family's pool visits to demonstrate her compliance with the rules. She even requested copies of meeting minutes from the Homeowner Association, hoping to find evidence of how the decision to suspend her access had been made. Unsurprisingly, her request was denied. Feeling stonewalled yet again, Roxy realized she needed legal advice. She scheduled a consultation with a local attorney, a woman named Amanda Harper, who specialized in disputes involving homeowner associations. During their meeting, Amanda listened carefully as Roxy explained her situation, nodding thoughtfully as she went over the details. "This isn't the first time I've heard of issues with the Evergreen Homeowner Association," Amanda said. "They have a reputation for overstepping their authority, but that doesn't mean they're untouchable. Based on what you've told me, it sounds like they've violated their own rules by failing to provide transparency and due process." Amanda explained that the Homeowner Association's actions could potentially be challenged on several grounds, including lack of evidence, failure to follow established procedures, and possible discrimination. She also recommended filing a formal complaint with the State Homeowner Association Oversight Authority, which could investigate the matter and hold the board accountable if they were found to be acting improperly. Armed with this new information, Roxy felt a renewed sense of determination. She followed Amanda's advice, drafting a detailed complaint and submitting it to the Oversight Authority. In her letter, she outlined the events leading up to her suspension, highlighted the lack of evidence provided by the Homeowner Association, and requested an independent review of the board's decision. She also included copies of her documentation, including her log of pool visits and the statements from supportive neighbors. Meanwhile, Roxy continued to rally support within the community. She shared her story on a local online forum, where it quickly gained traction. Dozens of residents chimed in with their own experiences, ranging from minor grievances to serious disputes with the Homeowner Association. The thread became a space for residents to vent their frustrations and connect over shared concerns, and it wasn't long before Roxy's situation became a rallying point for broader calls for change. Through all of this, Roxy remained focused on one goal: restoring her family's access to the pool. She wasn't seeking revenge or trying to make trouble for the Homeowner Association. She simply wanted fairness. But as the days turned into weeks, it became clear that this fight was about more than just her family. It was about challenging the unchecked power of a system that seemed to operate without accountability, and about standing up for the rights of everyone in the community who had ever felt silenced or ignored. By the end of the month, Roxy's efforts had begun to make waves. The Oversight Authority acknowledged receipt of her complaint and informed her that they were launching an investigation into the Homeowner Association's practices. Local media outlets picked up the story after seeing the buzz on the community forum, bringing even more attention to the issue. And within the neighborhood, conversations about the Homeowner Association's actions became impossible to ignore. Roxy knew the battle was far from over, but she felt a sense of hope she hadn't experienced in weeks. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't alone in her fight. Her voice was being heard, and she was determined to see this through to the end. Roxy Walker's battle with the Evergreen Homeowner Association was no longer just her own. What had started as a personal fight for pool access had become a flashpoint for larger frustrations brewing within the community. Yet, despite the groundswell of support and the growing attention to her story, the Homeowner Association remained defiant. Greg Daniels, the chairperson, had doubled down on his stance, asserting that the decision to suspend Roxy's pool access was in the best interest of the community. For Roxy, it was a maddening display of arrogance and lack of accountability. The investigation by the State Homeowner Association Oversight Authority gave Roxy some hope. They had requested detailed documentation from the Homeowner Association, including records of complaints, meeting minutes, and evidence supporting their decision. Roxy's attorney, Amanda Harper, explained that these documents would likely reveal whether the board had followed its own rules and procedures or whether they had overstepped their authority. While waiting for the investigation to progress, Roxy kept busy gathering additional support. She organized a small meeting at her home, inviting neighbors who had expressed frustration with the Homeowner Association. The turnout was larger than she expected. Nearly 24 people crowded into her living room, eager to share their own experiences. Some spoke of being fined for minor infractions, like leaving their trash bins out for an extra hour. Others mentioned arbitrary restrictions on lawn decorations, car parking, or even the colors of their front doors. One couple revealed that they had been threatened with legal action for building a small playhouse in their backyard for their children. "It's like they're looking for reasons to make our lives harder," said Sarah, a mother of 3 who had been fined for letting her kids draw on the sidewalk with chalk. "I thought homeowner associations were supposed to protect the community, not bully us." The group spent hours discussing their grievances, and by the end of the night they had formed a plan. They would circulate a petition demanding greater transparency and fairness from the homeowner association, as well as a review of its bylaws to ensure they were applied consistently and reasonably. Roxy volunteered to draft the petition and coordinate its distribution. It felt empowering to be taking action, and the group's solidarity gave her a renewed sense of purpose. Meanwhile, the online community forum where Roxy had first shared her story continued to gain traction. Residents from neighboring communities chimed in with their own tales of homeowner association overreach, turning the thread into a broader discussion about the role of such organizations. A local journalist, intrigued by the conversation, reached out to Roxy for an interview. The resulting article, titled "When Homeowner Associations Go Too Far, Communities Fight for Fairness," was published in the town's newspaper and quickly went viral. The story painted a vivid picture of Roxy's struggle, highlighting the lack of accountability within the Evergreen Homeowner Association and the broader implications for other communities. The increased media attention put additional pressure on the Homeowner Association, but Greg Daniels refused to back down. In a statement to the press, he insisted that the board's actions were lawful and justified. "The Homeowner Association exists to uphold the standards of our community," he said. "While we understand that some residents may disagree with our decisions, we have a duty to act in the best interest of everyone." For Roxy, Greg's statement was both infuriating and baffling. What standards was he referring to? And how could arbitrarily suspending her pool access possibly serve the best interest of the community? Determined to challenge his claims, Roxy decided to attend the next Homeowner Association meeting, where she planned to confront the board directly. On the evening of the meeting, Roxy arrived at the community center armed with a binder full of documents. She had copies of the Homeowner Association's bylaws, records of her family's pool visits, statements from supportive neighbors, and even a timeline of her interactions with the board. The room was packed with residents, many of whom had come to support her. The tension in the air was palpable as the meeting began. Greg Daniels opened the meeting with a monotone recitation of the agenda. When it came time for public comments, Roxy stood up and walked to the microphone. She took a deep breath, her hands gripping the edges of the podium. "Good evening," she began, her voice steady despite the nervous energy coursing through her. "My name is Roxy Walker, and I'm here to address the decision to suspend my family's access to the community pool. I believe this decision was made unfairly and without proper justification, and I'm here to ask for answers." Greg's expression remained stony as Roxy laid out her case. She cited the Homeowner Association's own rules, which she had followed to the letter. She pointed out the lack of evidence supporting the board's claims and questioned the secrecy surrounding the supposed complaints. "If residents truly had concerns about my family's use of the pool, why wasn't I informed earlier?" she asked. "Why wasn't I given the opportunity to address these concerns before my access was revoked?" The room buzzed with murmurs of agreement as Roxy spoke. Several residents nodded in support, and a few even clapped. Greg, however, was unmoved. When Roxy finished, he leaned into his microphone and said, "Thank you for your comments, Miss Walker. The board will take them under advisement." Roxy's jaw tightened. "That's it? You're not going to respond to any of my points?" Greg's tone grew colder. "This is a public comment period, not a debate. The board's decision stands." Before Roxy could reply, another resident stood up. It was Frank, the elderly neighbor who had shared his story about the garden gnome. "I've lived in this community for 20 years, he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "And I've never seen the Homeowner Association treat someone as unfairly as they've treated Roxy. This isn't about upholding standards, it's about power. And it's time we did something about it." Frank's words ignited a wave of applause, and several other residents rose to speak in Roxy's defense. The atmosphere became charged with a mix of frustration and determination as the community rallied around her. For the first time, it felt like the board's authority was being truly challenged. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that the Homeowner Association was facing a crisis of credibility. Greg Daniels and the other board members left the room looking visibly shaken, and Roxy couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. The fight was far from over, but the tide was beginning to turn. As she packed up her binder and prepared to leave, Roxy was approached by several residents who offered words of encouragement and thanks. "You're standing up for all of us," one woman said. "Keep fighting." Roxy nodded, her resolve stronger than ever. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she was no longer alone. The community was with her, and together, they were ready to hold the Homeowner Association accountable. The investigation by the State Homeowner Association Oversight Authority had officially begun, but the Evergreen Homeowner Association's leadership seemed as entrenched as ever. Roxy Walker's persistence, however, had set a chain of events in motion that even Greg Daniels and the rest of the board couldn't ignore. The petition Roxy had spearheaded was gaining traction, with nearly half the community signing on to demand greater transparency and accountability from the Homeowner Association. Residents who had previously stayed quiet were now stepping forward, emboldened by Roxy's fight. What had started as a dispute over pool access had grown into a community-wide movement for fairness. The day after the heated Homeowner Association meeting, Roxy received a call from Amanda Harper, her attorney. Amanda informed her that the Oversight Authority had issued a formal request for the Homeowner Association's records, including the complaints used to justify the suspension of Roxy's pool access. "This is a big step," Amanda said. "If they can't provide documentation, it's going to hurt their case significantly." For Roxy, it was a small victory, but one that gave her hope. As the investigation progressed, Amanda advised Roxy to prepare for a possible hearing, where the Oversight Authority might require both sides to present their evidence. Roxy spent hours organizing her documents, reviewing the Homeowner Association's bylaws, and rehearsing her statements. She wanted to be ready for anything. Meanwhile, the media attention continued to grow. A local news station picked up the story, interviewing Roxy in front of the now-closed community pool. Standing by the gate with her children playing in the background, Roxy spoke candidly about her experience. "This isn't just about the pool," she said. "It's about standing up to an organization that's supposed to serve its community but instead uses its power to intimidate and control. We deserve better." The segment aired that evening, and the response was overwhelming. Neighbors stopped Roxy on the street to thank her for speaking out, while others shared their own stories of dealing with the Homeowner Association's heavy-handed tactics. Even residents from nearby communities reached out, offering support and advice. Roxy began to feel like her efforts were making a real difference not just for her family, but for the entire community. The turning point came when the Oversight Authority sent a preliminary report to both Roxy and the Homeowner Association. The report revealed significant irregularities in how the board had handled the complaints against Roxy. For one, there were no written records of the complaints, only vague verbal accounts provided by board members during their internal meetings. Additionally, the decision to suspend Roxy's pool access had been made without a formal vote, in clear violation of the association's own procedures. Armed with this information, Amanda filed a formal demand for the immediate reinstatement of Roxy's pool privileges, along with a written apology from the Homeowner Association. She also requested that the board undergo training on proper governance and compliance with state regulations. "They're backed into a corner," Amanda told Roxy. "At this point, they'll either have to comply or risk even harsher penalties from the Oversight Authority." The board's response was predictably defensive. Greg Daniels issued a statement claiming that the Oversight Authority's findings were incomplete and misrepresented the situation. But behind the scenes, cracks were beginning to show. Two board members quietly resigned, citing disagreements with how Greg had handled the situation. Rumors circulated that Brenda, the board member who had initiated the complaints against Roxy, was considering stepping down as well. Roxy could feel the tide turning, but she also knew that the fight wasn't over. The Oversight Authority scheduled a formal mediation session, requiring both Roxy and the Homeowner Association to present their cases. On the day of the mediation, Roxy walked into the room with Amanda by her side, her binder of evidence clutched tightly in her hands. Greg Daniels and Brenda were seated at the opposite table, looking tense but defiant. The mediator, a calm and impartial figure, began by asking each side to state their position. Greg launched into a rehearsed speech about the Homeowner Association's duty to maintain order and fairness, accusing Roxy of abusing the pool's guest policy. But when the mediator asked for evidence, Greg faltered. Without documentation to back up his claims, his argument quickly unraveled. When it was Roxy's turn to speak, she laid out her case with precision and clarity. She presented her log of pool visits, signed statements from supportive neighbors, and excerpts from the homeowner association's bylaws that proved she had followed the rules. "This isn't just about me," Roxy said, her voice steady but firm. "It's about ensuring that the homeowner association serves the community, not its own interests." The mediator listened carefully, asking questions and taking notes. By the end of the session, it was clear that Roxy had made her case. The mediator recommended that the homeowner association reinstate her pool access immediately and take steps to improve its governance practices. Greg Daniels, though visibly displeased, reluctantly agreed. In the weeks that followed, the fallout from the mediation continued to ripple through the community. The homeowner association sent a letter to all residents, acknowledging its mistakes and outlining plans for reform. Greg Daniels resigned as chairperson, citing personal reasons, and Brenda quietly stepped down from the board. New elections were held, and several residents who had supported Roxy during her fight were voted onto the board, bringing fresh perspectives and a commitment to fairness. For Roxy, the victory was bittersweet. She was relieved to have her pool access reinstated and proud of the changes she had helped bring about, but the experience had also taken a toll. Standing up to the homeowner association had required immense time, energy, and emotional resilience. Still, as she watched her children splash in the pool on a warm summer afternoon, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The fight had been worth it. The community, too, seemed to have been transformed by the ordeal. Neighbors who had once kept to themselves were now more connected, sharing stories and supporting one another. The new homeowner association board held its first meeting in the open air by the pool, inviting all residents to attend and share their concerns. It was a small but meaningful step toward rebuilding trust and fostering a sense of true community. As Roxy packed up her pool bag at the end of the day, a woman approached her with a warm smile. "Thank you for everything you've done," she said. "You didn't just fight for yourself, you fought for all of us." Roxy smiled, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. "I couldn't have done it without everyone's support," she replied. "This isn't just my victory, it's ours." With that, she walked home with her kids, the summer sun casting long shadows on the sidewalk. For the first time in months, Roxy felt a sense of peace. The battle was over, but its impact would last far beyond the summer. Together, the community had proven that even the most entrenched systems could be challenged, and that fairness and accountability were worth fighting for.